Waiting for the stream to fire up across the internets. If you're not a regular of the program, we like to broadcast on Facebook and Periscope, Twitter. We're even on Twitch now, but our home base is on YouTube, which is usually the last to go live, but it looks like we are there. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here in Scottsdale, Arizona. You can see our sign right there, the R&R Law Group. And my team and I, over the course of many years, we've represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges, and we've helped them through the justice system. And in our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with the criminal justice system. You're seeing many of them today out on the streets throughout the country. I'm talking about problems with the police, misconduct involving prosecutors, malfeasance from judges, and of course, political misconduct, which is what we're talking about yet again today. We are in the middle of an election season, and it seems to be that all we can talk about are criminal allegations as they relate to political people. Of course, today we're talking about Joe Biden and Tony Bobulinski. We have been covering this story for some time. Last night, he was on Tucker Carlson. We've got some clips from that interview that we want to go through, and we want to revisit some of the rules again. If you're like me, you're probably getting a little bit sick of hearing about this story or about this individual. What we have seen ever since this story broke is this daily constant drip of just forthcoming evidence. New information seems to be coming out every day. And it can be a little bit tiresome, right? We're kind of hearing the same stuff over and over again, and it's hard to keep track of all these different elements. Every day, it seems like the evidence becomes more and more sort of damning. We have more accountability. We've got more credibility. We've got more substance that is coming out on a daily basis, and it's hard to keep track of it all. And, this is not something that I want to spend a lot of time doing a slam dunk on as it relates to implicating Joe Biden or Hunter Biden. But this is one of those stories that I think is super important. And the reason we're spending so much time on it is because nobody else is. And we've done some documentation. Miss Faith did an awesome job today on going through and seeing where this story has been pulled up and where it seems to be missing. And the reason why we want to talk about it, like I said, is because nobody else is talking about it. And I think a lot of people in the country probably feel that way when the mainstream media, when the main news agencies, when social media, Facebook, Twitter, and so on, when they are trying to hide this information for us, it causes people like me to just want to get up off the sidelines and just shout this information from the rooftops. Anytime it feels like people are trying to hide stuff from me or hide the ball, it just makes me that much more motivated to go dive into it a bit further. And so I think probably not alone in that. I would imagine that a lot of other people are sinking their teeth into the story just a little bit more than they already would, just due to the fact that it is being hidden from the mainstream people, from a huge part of the citizens throughout our country, which is a major problem. So today, we're going to go through some clips from the interview from Tony Bobulinski. We've got, again, some of the rules, the federal rules of evidence that we can weigh his testimony against the rules and decide whether he's credible or not. I didn't write the rules. The rules are written and they're established across the entire nation. So let's see if we can get some guidance out of those. And then we want to spend a little bit more time really diving into this censorship issue because it really does fire me up. Why is this story, which is one of the biggest stories of the election, if not the biggest story of the election in my mind, because it directly relates to the character of Joe Biden and his son, and basically the first family that would be entering into the White House. This is a critical issue for all of us to digest, and the media has been complicit in making sure that we don't get the information that is valuable. So we're going to dive into that. We're going to talk about the censorship. We had the CEO of Jack Dorsey of Twitter and Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook. We're in front of Congress today. We've got a clip from Ted Cruz we're going to play. Then we've got the actual a sort of an opinion that was written by Justice Thomas on the U.S. Supreme Court regarding the issue of Section 230. And we want to spend a little bit of time dissecting that. Now, I've been asked about Section 230 a number of times on this program, and I just haven't done a deep dive into it. And so I spent a little time reading Justice Thomas's opinion, and I actually read the statute and some of the policy and the findings that Congress had when they enacted Section 230 back in the 1990s. And so we're going to go through all of that. And if we have a little bit of time left over, we've got some updates on the Ghislaine Maxwell story, which is still percolating. She is still sitting in a cell. in custody. So we'll do some updates on that. And then, of course, we'll spend some time at the end of the program doing the live chat. So if you're not already chatting it up, get ready, get going, get those fingers warmed up. Miss Faith is right back there, and she's doing a good job helping us keep control of the chat. She is keeping track of any super chats and things that come in. So if you want to send those, feel free. She's screenshotting those and sending them to me, but I will address them at the end of the program. All right, so let's dive into it. So the big news, of course, last night was that Tony Bobulinski, this individual who had very close working relationships with Hunter Biden, has apparently met specifically with Joe Biden, the candidate, the president, the current candidate, Joe Biden. This individual is saying they had one-on-one or 3 4-on-1 meetings. He was on Tucker Carlson last night. For a long time, a lot of people were saying that all of this material, all of this evidence is not credible. It can't be authenticated. Well, now we have an actual person speaking on the record with a major news organization. So let's see what he had to say, and then we can start sort of applying the rules. So we're going to watch some of the facts first. We are going to talk about, see what specifically Tony Bobulinski said. Then we're going to go back to the rules of personal knowledge under the federal rules of evidence, and then some other rules that we'll get into. So let's listen to what Tony Bobulinski has to say first, and then we'll dive into it.
The Biden family knew that you're going public with this. And you spoke to Rob Walker about it. Again, the self-described Biden family representative, and Biden family, meaning Joe Biden as well. What was his response when you let him know that you were going public with this?
Trying to coach me, trying to sort of say, hey, we don't want to do that. We don't want, press trucks out in front of our house. I'm going to have to move. I could lose my job. And all that, I'm not trying to cause any harm to anyone in this situation,
right,
let alone Rob Walker and his family, James Gillier and his family. But basically, Rob's position was, if you go on record with all these facts, you'll bury all of us.
If he doesn't come out on record, I am providing the facts.
Tony, you're just going to just bury all of us, man.
What was your response to that?
I was focused on pushing these guys to do the right thing, to demonstrate an ounce of integrity in front of the American people. They all know the facts. I live the facts. And luckily for the American people, all the facts are extremely well documented.
Yeah, luckily for the American people, they are well documented, but a huge portion of the country is never going to see them because the media is not showing them to anybody. Now, we have to listen to these clips sort of in context, right? Remember where we are. We're a few days out from election. We are, right in the middle of the thick of it, and this guy popped up out of nowhere. So the big criticism for Tony Bobulinski is this guy came out of nowhere, and he just sort of appeared, and now he's got all of this damning information. And he's sort of, I think, getting lumped into the same, this big, indescribable sort of conspiracy theory that the Democrats are sort of implying is taking place here, that some sort of foreign agencies put together this magical laptop with this weird hard drive that was dropped off from some unknown, blind, unidentified Mac shop owner, and then suddenly we have all of these other bizarre characters kind of popping up out of the woodwork. Well, that's not really what happened. Tony Bobulinski is somebody who was on the chain of emails. So once this evidence came out from Hunter Biden's hard drive, then somebody was poking through and they saw his name in these chains of emails. And so he's not one of the originators of this entire, controversy. He is somebody who was brought into it after this stuff had leaked. So presumably, had that original hard drive not leaked, and had the Joe Biden campaign and some of the people in the media who were sort of covering for them, had they not come out and said that this was all based on Russian disinformation, it's very likely that Tony Bobulinski would have never come out, would have never made an appearance because he wouldn't have been identified in the chain. And so now that they're saying that this was, he's part of this big foreign intelligence operation, now this is the point where he's getting upset with it. And that's what caused him to come out and then make the record clear. So in my mind, he's more credible based on the fact that he's one step removed. This is not somebody that, from what we've been able to gather, that was just looking to sort of come out and write a tell-all book on the verge of an election. We see a lot of people do that. Everybody has these, October surprises that are these big showstoppers. But Tony Bobulinski was somebody who came out sort of in response to the hard drive originally being leaked. It wasn't him who came to the forefront from my understanding of the situation. So his credibility, I think, is a little bit more on the level than some of these other characters. Now, we have another clip from him. He's explaining a little bit more about, what would have happened or how this all was taking place as it relates to Hunter and Joe Biden.
When I saw Adam Schiff go on record talking about Russian disinformation after this email had been posted online by the New York Post, and remember that email was to me from James Gilliar, right? It wasn't, I wasn't blind carboned or CC'd on that. It was to me stating that I was going to be the CEO of this enterprise. I was at the end of my rope. And so I called Rob Walker and I told him that if that statement isn't retracted by Congressman Schiff by midnight on Sunday, that I was going on record and I was disclosing all the facts to the American government, to the American citizen, and the world. I was hoping the Bidens would do the right thing or Schiff would retract his statement, but I could not allow another minute, another hour, or a day for my family's name to be associated or muddied up around Russian disinformation. So even as I sit here today, I would ask the Biden family to come on record and stop using my name or associating it with Russian disinformation. It's absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, it's a good pause there on Tucker's face. He has the best faces. The best faces. So when we're talking about Tony, he is somebody who's got a history with the military. He's got somebody who, his family served. This is a man who, from what I have been able to gather, very, very highly prides honor and his reputation and his family name, as we heard there. So his name started to appear in the leaks that came from Hunter Biden's hard drive. And now he's just here to set the record straight. And he gave them an opportunity to set the record straight on their own, but they needed to cling to the Russian disinformation illusion. They want to say that this is all disinformation because that is their little pressure release valve that prevents them from having to answer anything on the merits. Still to this day, we've heard Joe Biden call all of this stuff a lie, but we haven't dialed into any specifics. What is a lie specifically? What is he talking about? Because as it stands right now, we don't know, other than him saying that everything's a lie. The whole story's a lie, which I think the evidence shows the opposite of that. The evidence, in fact, is pretty clear. Here is another clip from the interview last night. We have Tony Bobulinski again on Tucker Carlson, and he's referencing this document.
He couldn't attend the meeting that he himself set up. I stepped away from family and friends on the yacht that I was on with my friends to go sit with him for a couple hours, and he's effectively screaming into the phone that he could not pick up the phone and text me because he was with the Ukrainians and Mykola, the founder of Burisma, and that he was fighting for the only income he has on the Kazakhstan deal that apparently he negotiated. Now, I had no exposure to a Kazakhstan deal. I'm not aware of any of the particulars of the Kazakhstan deal. I just know for a fact there is a Kazakhstan deal because Hunter Biden in first person told me there was in the text that I think you guys have and you will show to the American people. It's not my job to determine what that deal is. I'll leave that up to the FBI or the Senate and the Congress to figure that out.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear from this guy. Obviously, we've got a lot more personal knowledge. We've got him actually on the record being recorded, testifying about this information. You saw the text message that he was referencing saying, Tony, I wasn't asleep, and those guys work for the Ukrainians. Think I haven't left my room in 5 days. I was on so-and-so's boat talking about the Kazakh deal. You play this BS card all the time and exactly what the other meeting have I missed, Tony, so on and so forth. So, and it's going to Hunter Biden and James Gilliar, right? These are the people who are, by Tony Bobulinski's claim, they're in Joe Biden's back pocket. It's this close-knit family, and they're engaging in these deals as an extension of Joe Biden. That's his testimony. And let's take a look at the rules. Okay, now we have some pretty concrete evidence. We've got, somebody who's a witness, somebody who was personally there. We're not playing the telephone game anymore, where somebody told me that so-and-so said this about so-and-so, right? It's not 5 steps removed anymore. He's there. This guy's saying, I was there. I was sitting there with Joe Biden, and these are the text messages we had about the Suns. They were coaching me on not to wreck this whole thing. And what more do you want? Well, I don't know. Let's take a look at the federal rules of evidence. We looked at this, I think, earlier this week. We'll do a quick refresher on it. We have new evidence. Let's see how the new evidence applies to the rules. Federal Rule of Evidence 401. We need to decide whether or not this evidence is relevant. The rule for relevant evidence is it's relevant if it has any tendency to make a fact more or less probable than it would be without the evidence. So we're asking ourselves, is knowing that Tony Bobulinski had these meetings with Hunter Biden, had meetings specifically with Joe Biden, was talking about making arrangements that would give Joe Biden an equity stake in their new venture, is that information, would that impact whether people vote for Joe Biden or not? Would it make something more or less probable? Would it make a person's decision in this November 3rd election? Would it make it more likely or less likely? Or would it give them pause? Would it give them something to think about? If it tends to make it more probable than it would without the evidence, then it's going to be relevant. It's going to at least satisfy the first prong of Rule 401. Rule 401B says the fact is of consequence in determining the action. So again, both of these things have to be true. If any of this evidence from Tony Bobulinski makes our decisions, it makes the analysis that we want to complete as it relates to how we are going to vote, if it makes it more or less probable than it would without the evidence, and if it's of consequence in determining whether we're going to vote for him or not, then just based on that standard, it's relevant. It's a very, very low bar. It's not even a complicated rule. It just basically says if it has any impact on the final determination, then it's going to be relevant. The next rule that I wanted to bring up is Rule 602. This is talking about the need for personal knowledge. So now we're talking about a witness. We're talking about Tony Bobulinski, and we want to know, what are the standards surrounding personal knowledge? It says a witness may testify to a matter only if evidence is introduced sufficient to support a finding that the witness has personal knowledge of the matter. All right, so the matter here would be the engagement with Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, his brother Jim Biden, James Gilliar, all these different people. Does he have personal knowledge of that matter? Yeah, he said he was sitting there. He had lunch or he had events with them. He also has emails with them. So he satisfies that part. Evidence to prove personal knowledge may consist of the witness's own testimony. So even if he didn't have those meetings, even if he didn't have those recordings, his personal knowledge alone is sufficient. So, I mean, if he had the meetings, he didn't need emails that were documenting the meeting. Just the fact that he showed up there, he can say, yeah, I was at the meeting. No, I don't have a recording. No, I don't have any emails. No, I don't have a calendar date. No, I don't have, a thank you card written by Joe Biden, signed by Joe Biden, and delivered to me saying, hey, thanks for the lunch and thanks for negotiating this corrupt Chinese deal with me. He doesn't need that. He just needs personal knowledge. So under Rule 602, it's sufficient in my mind. There's no two ways about it. So is the media going to cover it now? I'm going to guess not. We got another clip over from Tucker last night. Let's see what he has to say.
Information has been out for several weeks. It's been in the hands of a number of different news organizations. The reason you're hearing a lot of this for the first time tonight on this show is because they have resolutely ignored it and tried to suppress the story. Joe Biden has rarely been asked about it, though there is an enormous amount of detail and documentation that no one has refuted because it's real. This topic did come up because the president pushed it at last week's presidential debate. And what was notable was that Joe Biden didn't deny any specifics about his connections to the Chinese Communist Party, his family doing business there, he himself participating in that business.
Yeah, so obviously this is not a Tucker Carlson show, but he had a very important interview on last night. He's got a lot of good points about this story. He's the only one that I have seen in the media taking this story by the horns, and a lot of other people are just sort of just letting it go, right? And we're going to dive into that. We've seen sort of a total whitewash of this story across the board, across all of the different platforms. Here is Steve Malloy from @JunkScience on Twitter. He is saying here, you can see that he did a search on CNN.com for Bobulinski. Nothing, not a single article on CNN.com. He posted this today, this morning at 7:10 a.m. CNN has never heard of Tony Bobulinski. It's just astounding to me. Astounding. Same story with NPR. Here's NPR. We search for Bobulinski. Steve Malloy also posted this. NPR, no news story on Tony Bobulinski. But if you search for it, you'll get Brulinski. Rob Brulinski will pop up talking about a peek inside the copycat building where artists work. Wow, isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? You know, this is something that is just, it's wild to me that this is so, it's so clear cut. It's so obvious that they are literally censoring the story from their major publications. It's pretty bizarre. When we look over on New York Times, we're going to see the same thing. Steve Malloy did some great work on this. Go follow him @JunkScience. He also found this on the New York Times. Bobulinski and bury all of us. 0 results. Nothing there. The paper of record doesn't even believe this is news. Now, there are some people talking about important issues this election. We're talking, of course, about Jake Tapper, who is definitely covering the story about Donald Trump and the fact that at a rally last night, some supporters didn't have enough buses and they got pretty cold. Some of them actually did require medical attention. So for those who needed that, you know, we wish them well. But this is the story that Jake Tapper is promoting today. He said this in Omaha. Hundreds who attended the Trump rally spent up to 3 hours in freezing temperatures, so on and so forth. And Tom Bevan says, yeah, the buses are more important than Bobulinski because they don't want to talk about it. It's bad information. It's bad news. And we're going to talk about that. What does Section 230 actually mean? We've got some more of this coming on from, where is this from? Twitter itself specifically. So we've got Jenna Ellis. She says over 1 million tweets about the Bobulinski interview. And since the Biden crime family, this is the banner on Twitter's election page since this morning. Trump attendees stranded after listening to the president. And she says repeal Section 230. Which we're going to talk about next. So this is just pretty standard. You know, this is something that I have been feeling when I would go on my social media. I have a list of websites that I check every day in preparation for this show, or, you know, there's a list of about 50 of them. I check about, 10, 20 of them, depending. But it's one of the things that I have seen missing from all of the mainstream sites. This stuff is only available on the sort of the alternative, far right wing types of websites. The mainstream news is just simply not covering it, even though it is, in my opinion, this is just applying the rules. This is just listening to the evidence. This is stuff that would be sufficient to bring actions in court, whatever that may be. And it's absurd that we are missing this type of information in the United States of America this close to an election, and a lot of these major media companies are just simply getting away with it. So Jenna Ellis said here she wants to repeal Section 230. This was something I had heard from a number of you on this channel, and I just hadn't taken a real big deep dive into what it means, and I started to. And so I want to talk a little bit about what it is and what it means. Now, the first thing that we need to establish here is the context of Section 230. So Section 230 was part of this big Decency and Communications Act. They passed a lot of stuff back in 1996. Okay, this is when this was originally passed into law. 1996. Okay, we're now at the year 2020. So quite a ways ago was when this law was passed. Now, many people are thinking, okay, well, the internet was kind of bubbling up around the late 90s. And so, this is sort of something that evolved as the internet was evolving. And maybe that's okay as a result. So just as in context, let's take a look at when some of the major powerhouses, some of the biggest companies in the world, let's look back and see when were they founded. So in 1996, Section 230 went into law. But when did some of these other companies start? Remember, 1996 is when the law started. We go over and we can see that there is a lot of companies that came about after that. Google was founded on September 4th, 1998, so 2 years after Section 230. Twitter was what was that, 10 years later after Section 230. They were founded March 21st, 2006. Facebook was a little bit before them, February 2004. And Amazon was just barely before them in 1994. And, Amazon still doesn't really have a major social media presence anywhere. So, if anybody is sort of exempt or not as impacted by what happens with Section 230, it's Apple. But YouTube was in 2005. Netflix was in 1997, just after. And remember, Netflix was sort of not really a big internet company at the time, other than just mailing DVDs. They weren't doing any streaming or anything like that. Apple, of course, was founded in 1976, but their major platforms also came much later. So just in context, remember, Section 230 was drafted and written long before Twitter existed, long before Facebook existed, long before even Google existed, 2 years before Google existed, and not even close in time to Google in its current form. Google started off as just a real small search engine company, doesn't have literally everything else like they have now, like documents and Google Plus and all of these different things. So that is the context of it. So this is something that is quite old. And now let's take a look at what the actual law says. Now this is kind of an instructive breaking down of a statute. And this is very important when we're talking about, in particular, Amy Coney Barrett and this concept of originalism. Originalism, textualism versus sort of this legislative history, interpretive, analytical framework that some of the more liberal judges like to do. They call it active liberty, where they're looking at everything in context and they want to craft a resolution based on the totality of all the things in the world that they think is relevant. That is one view of how to read statutes. The other view, which we're going to dive into with Justice Thomas, is more of an originalist interpretive philosophy. So let's take a look at the actual U.S. code. This comes from 47 U.S. Code Section 230, and you can see it here. This is the first part of the statute. And let me just explain. This is the findings of Congress. Okay, this is not the law, right? This is just the finding. This is what Congress does. Is they don't want to write a bunch of laws, they don't want to get too specific with certain things. So they put this into the statute. They say these are our findings. So this is not the law. This is just after their investigation. This is what they came up with, and then the courts oftentimes will rely on this information, even though it's not the law. So a textualist, an originalist, is not considering this stuff, because this isn't the law. They only want to look at the law. What does the specific law say? You can put a million things in the findings, or you can put a million things in the policy section, but if it's not the law, why are we considering it? That's one viewpoint. The other side is saying, all this is relevant and we should look at all of this. And I'm going to explain how this works, but let's just take a look at the law first so you understand what is happening. Why are these tech companies getting away with this stuff? So first and foremost, the findings are, again, back in 1996, these are 1996 findings, the rapid developing array of internet and other services are advancing educational and informational resources for our citizens. Okay, that really hasn't changed. These services offer a great degree of control over the information that they receive, as well as potential for even greater control in the future as technology develops. So users are able to control what they're going to be getting, which I think is still true, right? Number three, the internet and other interactive computer services offer a forum for true diversity of political discourse. Whoa, is that happening right now? Well, I would say no, it's not. To me, being on Facebook is not diversity of political discourse. It's pretty much one-sided. And I think this Tony Bobulinski ordeal has indicated as such. I think we just documented it, looking up on New York Times, looking up on Twitter, having Twitter literally prevent you from sending stories from the New York Post is not promoting diversity of political discourse. It's not promoting, unique opportunities for cultural development or myriad avenues for intellectual activity. It's pretty much one-sided. They're curating a distinct viewpoint, and they're allowing that viewpoint to foster on their platform, and they're not making it accessible or available to share diversity of political thoughts. Number four, the internet and interactive computer services have flourished to the benefit of all Americans with minimum government regulation. I like that idea. I don't like government regulation. Number five, increasingly Americans are relying on interactive media. They are literally relying on it for a variety of political, educational, cultural, and entertainment services. And since 1996, what do we think has happened here? Do we think that people are relying more on the internet or less on the internet? You know, we're going to hear from people like Jack Dorsey who say, oh no, people have many, many different channels for getting their news, for getting their services. And so Twitter is not influencing the election. Twitter's not doing anything because people can go to other platforms. Well, that may have been true in 1996. There were a lot. Remember that? There were all sorts of competing social media sites, and they have all just gotten wiped out by the Twitters, by the Facebooks, in large part because of the network effect. You don't want to be on a social media platform that has no users. So as these social media platforms pop up, people will bounce from one to the next, right? Where did TikTok come from? Well, it got a bunch of people on there, and more people want to be seen. They want their content to be shared and viewed, so they pile into that platform. So when Jack comes out and says, yeah, there's many other platforms, well, they can go to Parler, they can go to, any number of other websites. Yeah, he's technically true. It's technically true, but a huge portion, something like 36 plus million Americans are on Twitter, and they control a large portion of the discourse. So if they're now acting as sort of an editor and allowing certain things to come through and certain other things to not come through, maybe that is going to remove them from the Section 230 liability. All right, so that is the finding. So we know what Congress found. Now we want to look at their policies. What are they saying is important for their policies? Here is subsection B. It is the policy of the United States. So again, this is not law. Okay, this is just policy to promote the continued development of the internet. Great. To preserve the vibrant and competitive free market that presently exists. Okay, so if that is the policy, do you think that we still have a competitive free market on the internets? Do you? Do you really think so? Can you just start a company and go out and compete with Facebook or compete with Twitter or any of these other services? Not really. You have the opportunity to go start. You can go secure funding. You can go secure money and investment and all of that stuff. So you technically could, but practically, the answer is really no, right? These big conglomerates are insulated from, they have all this immunity granted to them by Section 230. They have all of the capital in the world. They've gobbled up all of the smaller companies, and they're basically immune from certain lawsuits. So how do you attack or break up these companies when they control the information? They have literally unlimited resources and just gobs of money. You're sort of at a distinct disadvantage. And we've talked about this in this show, that a lot of the big companies, when they get big, they're all for more regulations. They want more regulations because what regulations do is they hurt the smaller guys. They hurt the small business owners, anybody who wants to sort of try to compete with them, because Amazon and Google and Facebook, they have teams of attorneys. They have compliance departments. They can put a lot of assets on their team towards governmental compliance. But the small startups, they can't do that. It's a lot more difficult for them to do that. So once they get into the chief position, the number one alpha company, then they are okay with more regulations because it keeps the competition at bay. Let's go back to Section 230. So policy to preserve the competitive free market. I would argue that doesn't really exist anymore, in large part due to governments. Number 3, to encourage the development of technologies which maximize user control, remove disincentives for developing and utilizing blocking and filtering technologies to protect kids, to ensure vigorous enforcement of federal laws, to get rid of crimes as they relate to the internet. So that's the policy. Now let's finally get to the actual law. Let me get myself out of the way over here. This is the law. This is what we're talking about. This is what the courts are analyzing. So protection for Good Samaritan, blocking and screening of offensive material. It says number 1, C1, no provider or user of a computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. So if you are a computer service, if you're an internet service, you're not going to be treated as a publisher or the speaker. And that's important because if you are the publisher or the speaker, then you might expose yourself to liability. You're responsible for the things that you say. And we're going to go through an analogy here in a minute about a bookstore, and we're going to see how that sort of plays out under Section 230. The other subsection here, subsection 2, is saying that no provider or user shall be held liable on an account of So in other words, Facebook, Twitter, Google, they're not going to be liable for any action voluntarily taken in good faith to restrict access to or availability of material that the provider or user considers to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable. That's pretty big. It's a pretty big phrase. We're going to see how one company used that here in a minute, but whether or not such material is constitutionally protected. So as long as they voluntarily remove information and they do it in good faith and it falls within one of these categories, so it's obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable, if they remove it in good faith, even if it's constitutionally protected, they're okay. The company is going to be okay. They're not going to be held liable for removing that constitutionally protected information. Subsection B says any action taken to enable or make available to internet providers or other technical means to restrict access as described in paragraph 1. So it's creating this protection, and then it's also including other mechanisms that may be used when it comes to enforcing the provisions in subsection A. So that's the law. Okay, that's it. That's the whole thing. That's what everybody's fighting over. There are some additional subsections. There's subsection D, which talks about protecting kids, and there's other definitional sections that take place further down the law, but that's really what we're talking about. It's section 230 right there, and you can see it's not that broad. This is old. It was written in 1996. It has a really big catch-all here, this otherwise objectionable provision, and it's basically giving these tech companies total access to remove stuff as long as they're acting within good faith and they're saying they find it somehow objectionable. And a lot of people are very upset about this. And I would have considered myself sort of a non-player in this issue. But now that I'm seeing how this is literally taking place right before our eyes every day, as the information that is being revealed against Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, as it gets worse, the censorship and the limitation of the information just is getting worse day by day. And so I think a lot of people are going to be in my camp and say, all right, that's it. All right, enough. Now we need to talk about this. And it's probably going to end up backfiring for those trying to control this information, but we will see. We are certainly seeing a lot of dismay from around the country. We have Kevin McCarthy, who is the GOP leader, who posted this. This was a few days ago. He says, big tech is blatantly trying to suppress free speech and prop up Joe Biden's campaign. Now is the time to scrap their 230 protections and start over. So he's the leader of the GOP. We also have here, we have a statement from, a number of people. It comes from the Office of the Attorney General, the Assistant Attorney General, so it's not from Bill Barr himself, but it is from the U.S. DOJ, sending this over to the chairman of the Senate Committee on Transportation Science, also to the Judiciary Committee, another Judiciary Committee, also to the Energy and Commerce Committee over in the House. And this Assistant Attorney General is saying, listen, we are getting tired of this. We note the bipartisan interest in the matter of reforming Section 230, and they want to address it at an upcoming hearing, which actually happened today, entitled "Does Section 230 Sweeping Immunity Enable Big Tech Bad Behavior?" It goes on. It says, for example, the decision by 2 social media companies to restrict access to news content of significant public interest from the New York Post, widely distributed journalism publication, is quite concerning. And it goes on, it just kind of is laying out this framework for why they want to address it. So the U.S. Assistant Attorney General is now going on the record and saying we need to address this stuff. The Department of Justice notes Thomas's recent call for the Supreme Court in an appropriate case to review lower decisions and decide, what does Section 230 mean? He notes, and we're going to go into Justice Thomas's opinion here in a little bit, those decisions have emphasized non-textual arguments, which is exactly what I'm talking about. They're non-textual arguments. They're going beyond the natural reading of the text. They're looking at things like policy. They're looking at things like findings, and they're not actually reading the text for what it is. There was a recent announcement that the FCC chairman will actually go through a rulemaking process to address some of this. So some of this, they're trying to find out, what are they going to do about this? There are a couple different ways that they could approach this Section 230 issue. Number one, the courts could define what that means. What does Section 230 mean? If it goes up to the Supreme Court, they have an opportunity to clarify how they're going to be interpreting this stuff. But as we see here, Justice Thomas just agreed that they were not going to hear this case, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So the judiciary can do something about it. The executive can do something about it through the FCC. Chairman Pai can go in and write some rules about how this stuff is going to be interpreted and enforced under the executive authority of the FCC. And finally, Congress can do something about it. Congress can actually, pass new laws. They passed the law in 1996 that put this stuff into place. So maybe they should modernize it. Maybe they should, actually update it so that we can know what it means and we can make sure that it's applicable in the year 2020 and beyond. This letter goes on. He's talking about what we call viewpoint discrimination. He's saying the broad interpretation of immunity that has been established by Section 230 lets online platforms moderate lawful content without transparency or accountability. And of course, these are not merely hypothetical, as we have seen over these past few weeks. They're also, we see this a lot in letters to Congress, but we see them wanting to make sure that they understand we're going to be doing this for the children. Everything's about saving the children. If we modify Section 230, then that's going to allow us to crack down on things that are bad for kids. So child sexual exploitation, sale of drugs, and all of that stuff. So they're going to introduce some sort of criminal elements, of course, because everything has to be criminalized these days. But then we also have the final thing here from Stephen Boyd, Assistant Attorney General, says citizens are relying on the internet more than ever for commerce, entertainment, so on, public discourse. Children are more time online. There's more criminal activity going online. All of the factors, we believe there's a path forward and so on. So they're asking Congress to hop in there and address some of these challenges. Whether the Congress does it, whether the judiciary does it, or whether the executive does it, there could be a number of different entities in our government that is working to modify these things. And as a result of what we've seen out of the New York Post, the executives from Facebook and Twitter were actually called into Congress. And we have a clip here from Ted Cruz, who's going after Jack Dorsey a little bit. And he's doing I'm a very angry politician. I'm going to use a swear word so you know how serious shtick that they tend to do once you get elected to office.
Mr. Dorsey, who the hell elected you and put you in charge of what the media are allowed to report and what the American people are allowed to hear? And why do you persist in behaving as a Democratic super PAC, silencing views to the contrary of your political beliefs?
Let's give Mr. Dorsey a few seconds to answer that.
Well, we're not doing that, and this is why I opened this hearing with calls for more transparency. We realize we need to earn trust more. We realize that more accountability is needed to show our intentions and to show the outcomes.
Thank you, Senator.
So I hear the concerns and acknowledge them, but we want to fix it with more transparency.
Does Twitter have the ability to influence elections?
No.
Really?
You don't believe Twitter has any ability to influence elections?
No, we are one part of a broad spectrum of communication channels that people have.
So you're testifying to this committee right now that Twitter, when it silences people, when it censors people, when it blocks political speech, that has no impact on elections?
People have choice of other communication channels with which.
Not if they don't hear information. If you don't think you have the power to influence elections, why do you block anything?
Well, we have policies that are focused on making sure that more voices on the platform are possible. We see a lot of abuse and harassment, which ends up silencing people and having them leave from the platform.
What a joke. Oh my gosh. Then why are they editing and monitoring? Why are they putting little notations on all of Donald Trump's tweets? If there is nothing that he is doing that is impacting the election, if every time he tweets about the mail-in ballots or about voting early or about going any one of those tweets where they put the little notation on there that says this guy's a loser, how is that not an admission that they are trying to modify the impact of that message? So if Donald Trump says something that is specifically intended to impact the election, right? There's no question about that. If Donald Trump puts a tweet, if he tweets out that says, make sure all of your ballots are returned because the Democrats are trying to do something sneaky. He's telling people literally to go vote, go take their ballots and take them into the election. And if Twitter posts something on there that says, fact check something, check your local registrations, this isn't true, whatever they've done it multiple times now at this point. then how is that not directly impacting the election? Because it's modifying a message that was created with the sole intent of impacting the election. Trump is trying to impact the election. Twitter's trying to unimpact or modify the president's impact. They are directly impacting the election. So that type of testimony is just flat out dishonest as far as I can tell. Otherwise, they wouldn't need to be modifying the president's tweets. We've seen this with coronavirus. We've seen this with them literally limiting the story. I've personally experienced this. I've tried to retweet things, and I've talked about it here, where I'll hit the retweet button and it'll say, headlines don't tell the full story. So they're trying to dissuade you from tweeting something, even though I did read the headline. It'll suggest, hey, you want to read the story before you retweet it? And I'll say, yeah, I already read it. That's why I'm retweeting it. It's a good article. I think it's pretty damn accurate, and I support it being, spread to my followers, which, I don't actually have a lot of activity. I use Twitter all the time in terms of just consuming media, but I'm not super active on it. But the point is, it's clearly having an impact on an election, and they're doing what they can to make sure that the impact is in their favor. They are making these modifications to secure an outcome that they want. So in my mind, that was totally dishonest, that type of statement. And actually, Ted Cruz posted later, he said that he posted the statute under the U.S. Code that makes it a crime to lie to Congress. Later in the interview, apparently Jack Dorsey had indicated that it's now okay to share that New York Post story, the one that was originally being censored or limited in terms of the distribution. So he came out to Congress today and said, no, you can share that story again. Well, a lot of people now were trying to share the story, and they're still limited. Twitter is still preventing them from sharing the New York Post original story about Hunter Biden. So he flat out just lied. And now Congress knows that. Are they going to do anything about it? Are they going to indict him under the U.S. Code that makes it a crime to lie to the Congress? No, of course not, because they're not going to do anything about it. All right, attacks. So this comes from CNN. Attacks on Section 230 have escalated in the recent days as Facebook and Twitter limited the distribution of articles. So CNN's actually talking about the limitations, not so much the underlying offense, not so much about Tony Bobulinski. Claimed it obtained the smoking gun emails. Facebook said it decided to reduce distribution of the article pending fact-check review, part of its policy against misinformation. Twitter blocked users from retweeting links, main part of its story against spreading hacked materials, even though it wasn't clear whether the underlying emails are attributed or were hacked, copied, or fabricated. So this whole thing is just ridiculous. And Jack Dorsey, we all know what he's doing. He's going to Congress and he's doing this mea culpa thing. They blocked that story because they intended to impact an election. Clear as day, they knew what they were doing. They didn't want this information to get out. They still don't want this information to get out. Then when they're dragged in front of Congress, they go, oh yeah, we're so sorry. We realize now we need more transparency. We need more accountability. Yes, Mr. Congress, do whatever you want to do. Regulate us a little bit more if you have to. We know we need it. And then that's going to just continue to secure their position. The more regulations are going to keep Twitter and Facebook and Google and all of the other ones afloat while making it more difficult for new consumers to enter into the market. They're going to have a bigger barrier to hurdle, to jump over in order to compete with these guys. And by the time this accountability, by the time this transparency BS that he is talking about, by the time it's implemented, the election's going to be long gone. It's going to be long and over. And the main reason for passing a reform is now going to kind of be gone because we got 4 years until the next presidential election. So people aren't going to be as concerned about whether information is limited or not. Right now, the spotlight is on Twitter. They knew the spotlight was on them. They limited the story and the distribution anyway. They came back and said mea culpa, but the damage has already been done. They've already been successful in limiting the information. And there's probably not going to be any repercussions for it. If Section 230 is repealed, that may be well and good, but what does that do now? What does that do here today? So they knew what they were doing, in my opinion. They did it anyways, and they knew that if they have to make changes, they've already won this miniature battle. Maybe they're going to lose the war because Congress is going to, pass some serious reform. But by the time they get there, the damage will be done. And at that point in time, maybe the Democrats have the White House. Maybe they have the Senate. Maybe they have the House. Maybe they have the judiciary. Maybe they pack the courts. They add 6, 7 judges on there, and they control all 3 branches of government. So do you think Section 230 reform is going to pass then? course not. This same level of immunity, of escaping liability, is going to be set in stone even further, so that this type of communication, this limitation on information, can continue on and secure their sort of intellectual internet monopoly for the foreseeable future. Let's see how this all works. So we have here just a little bit of an excerpt from an opinion that was written by Justice Thomas, who does want to hear this stuff. He wants to hear this in court. We see this case. It is Malwarebytes versus Enigma Software. This was in the Supreme Court, very recent, October 13th, 2020, written by Justice Thomas, respecting the denial of certiorari. So remember, when a case is working its way up to the Supreme Court, not every case that goes to the Supreme Court actually makes it into the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court gets to decide what they want to hear. Some things they want to hear. Some things they say, we've already decided that issue. We're not going to hear that case. Sometimes they say that's just moot. It's a political issue. We're not going to hear it. Go take that back to Congress. Let Congress deal with it. And so this case worked its way up to the Supreme Court, but it didn't make it in. It got denied. And Judge Thomas, in denying it, he wrote out and explained why he wanted to deny it. He indicates here that this section, a lot of the same concerns that we talked about here. He says the petition asks us to interpret a provision which is called Section 230, federal law enacted in 1996, gives internet platforms immunity from some civil and criminal claims. When Congress enacted the statute, most of today's internet platforms didn't exist, and in the 24 years since, we have never interpreted this provision. Many courts have construed the law broadly to confer sweeping immunity on some of the largest companies in the world. And he's exactly right. In 96, many of these companies were not that big. But this case involves, let me give you some of the facts, just the quick and dirty on this case. It involved a company called Malwarebytes. If you're sort of a product of the 2000s, I think it was, when I was growing up, I was really sort of obsessed with internet antivirus companies and anti-malware stuff. I had a lot of fun experimenting with the different software, and I wanted to see which ones had different databases, which one had more virus sort of signatures, which ones would protect me more, which ones had low impact on my CPU, which ones were the least bandwidth intensive and which ones were updated most. I used to study all that stuff. I was like kind of a geek. And then what I would do is I would go around and I would try to infect my computer with things. And this is when I was kind of a kid. And so what I was doing is I remember Malwarebytes, I guess is my point. This is one of those companies that's been around for a long time, and they have a piece of software that will actually, it's like a firewall. It will prevent you from going on to bad websites. And traditionally, back in the early days of computing, things were pretty unsecure. You could go to a website, get some cookies in your browser, and then your whole computer is a mess. You remember those days before things were a lot more secure. You actually had to have antivirus software and anti-malware software because everything you downloaded was just packed with malware. And so Malwarebytes had this software that would protect you from those websites. Sounds good, but one of the websites that they prevented you from going to was their direct competitor called Enigma. So they said, well, you can't go there. That site is not any good. And they literally prevented people from going to their website, the websites of their competitors. So Enigma came back and said, this is ridiculous. This is anti-competitive. And they sued Malwarebytes. Malwarebytes turned over to Section 230 and said, okay, well, remember what the law says. It says that we're allowed. We're immune from liability. We're allowed to, we're not publishers of this stuff. We're just sort of distributing it. We're not liable for it because we're allowed to actually, in good faith, we're doing this in good faith. We can block access to what we consider to be objectionable material. And the Supreme Court actually never heard the case, but it did go up through the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit came back and they relied on not the law, but they relied on the policies and the findings that we had just spoken about. And so they said, no, this feels like it's a little anti-competitive. And in the policy, we said we wanted to foster competitive nature of the internet. So the Supreme Court or the Ninth Circuit Court was relying on that provision, whereas Justice Thomas is saying you can't do that. You can't actually do that. You have to agree based on what the text says, not what the policies and findings say. And he goes through this analogy where he's kind of talking about the distinction between distributors and publishers, And the analogy that I was thinking about when I was reading through this is we're talking about these tech companies. And so it's sort of, esoteric concepts and what's a publisher, what's a distributor, what is free speech, what does all that mean? But the way I kind of, I boiled it down was think about a bookstore like a Barnes & Nobles or a Borders, which aren't around anymore, but a bookstore. And the idea being that the bookstore is just a distributor of books. They don't write the books. They don't know what's in the books. They don't know anything about the books. So if they just distribute the books, they're not liable for what's in the books. The people who are liable for that are going to be the authors and the publishers. They create the content. They know what's in it. They're the ones responsible for saying it. They're the ones who wrote it on paper and they put it in the book. So if they say something that's defamatory against somebody, if they do something that's illegal in there, if they sell instructions for making your own nuclear bomb, if they sell you instructions on, recording illegal, child content, stuff like that, that would all be illegal in violation of the law. And so they're responsible for it because they have editorial control. So when the book leaves the publisher and goes to the bookstore is no longer responsible for selling that. Now, that being said, if the bookstore knows that there's something illegal in those books, so if they're selling a book of, child pornography, that they're going to be liable for that. If they know it's there, if they know it's illegal and they're still selling it anyways, then they become liable for that. So they can't escape liability under Section 230 just for that. They don't have an escape hatch for that. So if a bad book comes through, the publisher's responsible, not the distributor, unless they knew the content was illegal. So Section 230 then, it says you've got no liability for distributing the online content, and you've got no liability for removing the online content as long as you're doing it in good faith. So if the bookstore has something that they sell that's illegal, but they don't know about it, then they're going to be okay. If they sell something or if they remove something off of their bookshelves because they find that it's inappropriate and they do that in good faith, then again, they're not going to be liable for it. So what Justice Thomas is talking about here is that the courts have really just expanded this immunity. So it's really limited to those only two, those two provisions, but it's it's been expanded over the years by all these different courts so that basically protection goes to everybody, the distributors, the publishers, for almost anything. And it's saying that there's a lot of reasons why this should not go that far. And so specifically in his interpretation, in his opinion, he talks about this concept that courts have departed from the natural reading of the language. They are protecting companies from publisher liability when content is provided by others. But then we skip down in the opinion to say that editing a statement and adding commentary does not create or develop the final product, even in part, is dubious. And so what he's saying here is that if these platforms, if these different companies are adding stuff to the original content, or if they're taking it away, or if they're doing these things to modify the content, then they're essentially becoming more like a publisher. They're using their platform to keep certain viewpoints off or at bay, or they're modifying the stuff that comes onto their platform. So when Donald Trump posts a tweet and there's a big disclaimer there, that's them adding to the content. They're becoming more of a publisher at that point in time. And he goes on and he says that there is specifically a section here that is talking about the reason why this exists is to decline to exercise editorial functions. So to not remove things, not when they decide to exercise those functions. So he's making a distinction here. He's saying that these companies, we want to give them protections for not removing things, not give them a bunch of protections for removing things. He's saying we want to promote more free speech, more discourse. Those are in more of an alignment with the policy and the findings that Congress put in Section 230. That's not his opinion. That's my commentary. He's a textualist. He's an originalist. He doesn't look to that stuff. But he is saying that it's really meant, if you just read the language on its face, it's enough. You don't have to go through any more analysis. It's when companies decline to remove things, we give them the benefit of the doubt. Not when they're overly active in removing things, do they get the protection? So it's an interesting question, something that I think is very ripe for review, in large part based on what I have seen basically these last 2 weeks. We already knew that the big tech companies were sort of, politically aligned, just based on a lot of different things. I'm going to show you a website here in a little bit later if we have time to get to it. But news is very biased. I think it's probably time to revisit Section 230, and I would love to see what you all have to say about that. Now, before we jump into the live chat, let's take a final wrap up at Miss Ghislaine Maxwell. So depositions were released for her. They were released last Thursday. Federal judge ordered the transcripts to be released to the public as well. First transcript is more than 400 pages long. She went through 7 hours of questioning about her relationship, allegations about trafficking and sexually abusing young girls, a lot of questions about Bill Clinton, a lot of questions about Prince Andrew. Many names in these depositions are actually redacted, so we can't see them, but people are asking, or people are sort of speculating that these individuals may be Alan Dershowitz, they may be Bill Clinton specifically, Prince Andrew specifically, somebody named John Luke Brunel, Leslie Wexner. Dershowitz was upset, apparently, that his name was redacted. If you've been following him around, he has stated a number of different times, including on the Netflix documentary related to Epstein, that he wants more information out there. He wants his name out there. He wants to vindicate his name, and he's been very, very aggressive with that. To his credit, right? If he has actually, if he had nothing to do with it, I would want my name cleared as well, which we will certainly see. So Miss Faith put together some highlights from the transcripts that were just released. So let's take a quick look at some of these. Then we are going to dive into the chat. So Ghislaine Maxwell, here she is. The attorney doing the questioning says, did Jeffrey Epstein have a scheme to recruit underage girls to recruit them for sexual massages? If you know. She says, I don't know what you're talking about. All right. Okay. She says, somebody asks him, are you saying these 30 girls are lying when they gave these reports to police officers? She says, I'm testifying to Virginia's lies. I'm not testifying to their lies. I can't talk about those other girls, but I'm not asking about Virginia's lies. She says, I can only testify to Virginia's lies. So this is from Ghislaine Maxwell. The attorney asks, and here's where we see some redactions. Do you recall whether number 7, number 8, number 9, were they ever on that island? She says, categorically, definitively, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, when I was present or any other time that I am aware of was island. I do not believe he went to that island ever. That is an absolute fabrication and an absolute flat out lie. So is it 3 people? Is it 1 people? It seems like she's talking about 1 person right there. And she goes on, the question goes on, were you his girlfriend in that year in 2004? She says, define what you mean by girlfriend. He asks, were you in a relationship with him where you would consider yourself his girlfriend? She says, no. Did you ever consider yourself his girlfriend? She says, that's a tricky question. There were times when I would have liked to think of myself as his girlfriend. When would that have been? In the early 90s. And so we're not getting any information out of this, right? This is pretty much nothing. The depositions are not revealing much of anything. And as the investigation continues to unfold, they have been going through and trying to get some of these other people who were involved on the record. They tried with Prince Andrew, which resulted in a big nothing burger. Prince Andrew in 2011, Jack Scarola, representing Brad Edwards, faced procedural impediments to obtaining a sworn deposition from a member of the British royal family. They were trying to get him. They said, hey, we would be very keen to speak with Prince Andrew, given his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. We have reason to believe that he's been in the company while Mr. Epstein was in the company of underage children. Prince Andrew never responded. 2 weeks after Jane Doe 3-4 moved to join this action, spokesman for Prince Andrew denied Jane Doe's 3's allegations. No explanation what he was doing with her in a private setting. January 2015. Again, Jack Scarola sent another certified letter asking him to voluntarily cooperate about his sexual interactions, and the letter was refused by the recipient. So they sent it from Federal Express, and it was refused by the recipient. Isn't that a shame? All right, so Ghislaine Maxwell got a new attorney. Her name is Bobby Sternheim, and she's the same trial lawyer that actually represented Osama bin Laden's associate, Khalid al-Fawaz. Now, I've never heard of this woman here. Never heard about her. It doesn't mean anything. It's just one of those things. This is my area of law, and I typically know the people who are floating around in it, but I've never heard of her. Now, Ghislaine Maxwell, she is still in the Metro Detention Center. So she's still in Brooklyn. This is where she is staying currently, the Metro Detention Center. She has 2 cameras on her at all times, which is good because apparently the last cameras in Epstein's cell weren't working. She's waking up every 3 hours and searched. Every 3 hours, they're waking her up and searching her. Brian Brisham, who's a British PR veteran, is part of the Maxwell family's operation, calling it GGO. Get Ghislaine Out is the acronym. So they're going to try to help by submitting a formal bail, an application for bail, which I think is not going to get granted. There's just no way. There's no way a judge is going to let her out of custody. We all know what happened with Epstein, and basically Ghislaine is the last one who's part of that secretive cabal. Are they going to let her out of custody? No. Basham, the attorney, said she's on her own floor. She has a very small cell, but she doesn't have a table to put her computer on. So apparently she has a computer in her cell, and she is currently scheduled for trial on July 12th, 2021. So they set an end date on the trials typically, but there's going to be a lot of other things that happen leading up to the trial, and we'll continue to follow that along. So if you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button, and let's jump on over to the chat. Let's get to the chat. So if you are not already familiar with this, it's a good idea to warm up your fingers by saying, hi, Faith. Faith is back there in the office right behind me. She does an awesome job helping me with the chat, helping me moderate these things, making sure I stay on track, making sure I answer the questions. So that's a good way to welcome her to the program. So let's dive into it. Let's see any other questions, any other thoughts on any of the content that we presented today. We covered a lot of Tony Bobulinski stuff. We also did some of the Section 230 stuff, a lot of the censorship stuff. What are people interested in on? So let's see here. We got some questions. Let's see. Sarah Brown says, this video has been buffering so much, I'm probably 5 minutes behind live. Doesn't normally happen. Is anybody else getting the buffering problem? Let me check my stuff here. I think everything is looking good, but let me know if you're having any other buffering problems. McLovin says, I'm late, but here. Xfile says, freedom of speech in public is pretty much universally recognized. Most of the internet and sites like Facebook is publicly accessible. That's true. Never Trust a Lawyer says, I want to see all the names in the name of public safety. So talking about the Ghislaine Maxwell stuff. USA Libertarian says, big tech is violating their terms of service. It's a contract. Government is to enforce contracts. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I would agree with that. Now, I will be honest. I don't read the terms of service. It's too long. It's like a novel, and you just usually click accept. So I'm not a terms of service expert on that. Let's see what else we've got. We've got Section 230 needs reform. This comes from Marine 2007. He says, I watched the whole thing today. Ted Cruz tore into Jack about censoring the New York Times article. That was basically the highlight of the hearing. Yeah, Ted Cruz is pretty good at that. He's somebody who knows how to put on a show, and he's sharp. He's got a very good sort of a prosecutorial approach to handling these things. When I saw Ted Cruz, I was a little bit surprised, actually. He seemed a little bit caught off guard by Jack Dorsey's response. When Ted Cruz asked him specifically about, do you think that Twitter has the ability to impact the election? And Jack Dorsey said no. Ted Cruz looked like, what? Like, you're going to admit that? Like, are you serious? And like, he wasn't prepared for that. And I don't know, in law school and when you're practicing law, they teach you this. Don't ever ask a question you don't know the answer to. And in my mind, it felt like Ted Cruz asked that question and he was surprised by that answer, when I think that he should have expected the answer to be for them to say, of course not. Of course we don't impact the election. Because any other answer than that is going to invite more regulation and invite more scrutiny. So I was sort of expecting that would be the answer. And then Ted Cruz seemed a little bit thrown off by it, which kind of caught me a little bit. We have MLP Dealer 32 says, Maxwell is stonewalling. I'm getting a buffering issue at times. Also, Ted Cruz was like a cruise missile in regards to Jack Dorsey's BS answers. All right. So another buffering issue. I'll have to look at that. What did you think about the Bobulinski interview? So I thought it was very good. We covered that at the very beginning of the show. And I thought it was, damning. I thought it was credible. I thought he seemed authentic. I thought his motivations were reasonable. This idea that, he didn't want to bring this stuff forward, but when they started accusing him of specifically being connected to Russian disinformation, he got very upset about that, and he wanted to come clear his name, clear his record. And I think many of us would agree with that, right? If you're sort of being thrown into this mix of saying that you're being a part of a foreign disinformation campaign that's going to throw off the election, if Bobulinski is a part of that and and that could ruin everything. It could ruin his reputation, his career, all of his businesses. And so you can't let stuff like that stand, and he's not. So when I watched it, I thought, this guy looks pretty reasonable to me. This isn't somebody like we've seen in the past who has a really, bad history, somebody who's not credible, somebody who has ulterior motives, somebody who wants to promote a book. That wasn't him. That wasn't this guy. He's just coming out and setting the record straight. So I found it to be quite credible. We got a super chat from Mr. Zulu. He says, "Hi, Faith. Rob, what can we as a private citizens do to forward the cause of government manipulation of private businesses? What can we as private citizens do to forward the cause of government manipulation of private businesses?" And then he asked boycott. So that's an interesting question, Zulu. You're going to have to clarify that one a little bit for me. So when you say, government manipulation of private businesses, and then you want to boycott, are you saying that you want to boycott the companies or boycott the government? So certainly, right, you have the freedom to boycott Facebook. No question about that. And that's where my skepticism comes in on the government doing something about the tech companies, right? I typically don't like the government regulating certain things. I agree. I want a free and open internet, and I want more discourse, and I want more opinions, and I want more ability for wild ideas. I want people to be able to say crazy things and propose crazy ideas. We want more of that. And if the government comes in and starts regulating things, then we see limitations on that. But in this case, it's almost like the opposite. So in this case, the government is actually specifically carving out protections for these companies that wouldn't otherwise apply. So they're giving them some additional benefit that wouldn't apply to you or I. And in large part, it was because back in the 1990s, we didn't really know what this internet thing was going to look like or how it was going to evolve. Remember, Facebook wasn't even in existence at the time. But now that it is in existence, the question then becomes, okay, what can we do about it? And so I certainly, if you're asking if we should boycott the government, sure, I don't know what that would look like, but I think a lot of people would agree that the government is a lot of the problem in a lot of these things with how they meddle with certain areas of our lives. But in terms of, Section 230, if you repeal that, then all you're essentially doing is opening up the tech companies to the same level of liability, the same level of scrutiny that many of us would otherwise face. They have just been excluded for it for so long. We would really just be leveling the playing field. That's kind of how I am reading it. Kenneth Reeder says, "I don't think anything will happen to Facebook or Google or Twitter owners. I would like to see Section 230 taken away." Yeah, I agree. I mean, think about this. So when I was in college, I was in a political science class, and I was listening to a professor. His name was Professor Ball. He's a brilliant man, knew a lot, and he told us this story about, I forget who it was, but some really big businessman back in the 1800s. And somebody asked this really, one of these oil guys or one of these railroad guys or whatever it was. One of them said, "Hey, why don't you run for Senate? You've got all this money. You've accomplished all this stuff. You already have everything." So think of this person as like, as a Mark Zuckerberg or as a Jack Dorsey. This person is of that caliber, owns an entire industry essentially. And they asked him, "Why don't you just run for Senate? Gosh, you could get in there and you could, change the world." And he said, "Why would I run for Senate? I already have the best senators that money can buy." And I think that's exactly what we're seeing here. We have a lot of senators who know how indebted they are to these big tech companies in their entirety, right? It's not only these big CEOs that are really supporting a lot of the Democratic causes, but it's also their employees. A lot of their employees, if you look up, which companies donate to which party, you're going to see that all of the Silicon Valley companies donate largely to the Democrats, which there's nothing wrong with that, right? I support free speech in supporting whatever political party you want, and they're free to do that. But the question comes in then, is that policy carrying over to the platform in a way that is impacting sort of everyday citizens? And if it is, and they're becoming more like publishers and less like the bookstore, they're more like the author, not like the bookstore, because they're adding material, they're adding text, they're limiting certain stories. They're basically manipulating the viewpoint that would take place on the platform. So if they're doing that, then that special section that we carved out that protects them should no longer be in play, and they should be treated like the other newspapers, like everybody else that has editorial control over their platforms. Good question. Long answer. Good question there, Zulu. Facebook was created by DARPA, not Mark Zuckerberg. That comes from A Woman Scorned. We have Sheila who says, boycott Google by using DuckDuckGo. DuckDuckGo doesn't track you. Check it out. You know, I did try DuckDuckGo for a while. I gave it a hard try for a month, and it's just not as good. Oh, I know it's not a popular opinion, but it's just not as good. It's unfortunate. All right. Bonnie Speck says, possibly Dems press no Biden is guilty to get Biden elected, then turn on him to place Harris in as president. USA Libertarian says they are violating their terms of service by lying about who they cancel and not just censoring the individual posts. Yeah, you know, this is something that I would agree with. The transparency portion of the conversation between Jack Dorsey and Ted Cruz was absolutely right? We don't know what they're doing. That's a big part of the problem. We have no idea what they're doing. And they're saying that they're not biased, and they have these groups of independent fact checkers, which, you know, who are these people? And they're, you know, it's a really, really just sort of difficult to quantify exactly what's happening. I think they know what they're doing, but the everyday user, think about the people who aren't even plugged into this issue. Okay, you on this channel, me, we are up to our ears over this type of information censorship. But a lot of the public, they don't even think about it. Whatever's in front of them, that's it. That's what they see. And so those people, you know, what if half the country doesn't know who Tony Bobulinski is? And that might be the case. Half the country may not have ever heard of him. That is pretty shocking in a country where freedom of speech is one of our most cherished principles, if not the cherished principle. It is our First Amendment. It's a big deal. We have a woman scorned who says Snopes is a fact checker. Zulu says you will never successfully sue them for deleting whatever they want. They don't even need a reason. USA Libertarian says you want anarchy, give it to me now. You want regulation, give it to me now. Zorro, my default search is Bing. Not sure if it's really any different, but I dislike Google slightly more than Microsoft. Sarah Brown says, you don't sue them for what they delete. You sue them for what they allow. The Nido God says, why can't those who feel Facebook is censoring? Well, I just lost that. He says, why can't those who feel Facebook is censoring right-wing content just create their own social media network? Facebook was not the first. Yeah, that's exactly right. So you could, right? And that's kind of the libertarian argument to this whole thing is, well, it's a free company. It's a company. They can do whatever they want. And you have a right not to use it. You can go use a different platform, which I agree with, right? You can go use a different platform. I've already explained why the network effect makes that very difficult to do. If everybody's on Facebook and nobody's on, right-wing social network, then nobody's going to use that platform. And you can say that's their fault. They need to promote it better. They need to do better marketing. They need to increase their user base. There's a lot of tactics that they can use to do that. But many people are just saying, all right, well, it's not fair. And in order to make it fair, maybe we should remove Section 230, because the Section 230 is giving this fake immunity, it's giving a benefit to these tech companies that they don't need anymore. In other words, they should be held liable. We carved out some rules for them to get them up to speed, to nurture and foster the internet. Okay, right? You don't put your child in professional football. You put your child in Pop Warner, and then they go to middle school, and then they go to high school, and then they go to college, and then they go to pros. You work them up. Well, the internet is now the professional leagues. The internet is now the big industry in the world. They don't need any of these special exemptions or any of these carve-outs. And so if they're going to be violating some of the underlying underpinnings of Section 230, specifically about creating a competitive environment on the internet, and some of the other provisions that we talked about, if they're not upholding those standards anymore, then maybe it is time to revisit Section 230, especially when we're talking about issues as serious as Tony Bobulinski and the next president of the United States. Trump mentioned he would create his own version of Google. Wonder how that would work out. Never. Okay, we have Cindy Falter says Facebook is bad. We have a woman scorn says everyone is on Facebook because the government promotes it behind the scenes. We have N the Reds says you can't build your own. They come after you with the FBI and service providers. Gab is an example. That's right. Gab is a great example. right? Gab is a great example. Gab is one of those that was, I haven't been following Gab a whole lot, but Gab actually, released their version of gab.ai or one of these different websites. And then they got like banned from all of the other social medias. Is Gab allowed on Twitter? Is Gab allowed on Facebook? Do they have, I feel like Gab itself got deplatformed. So they created their own platform, then they got deplatformed. That's kind of how I remember it. So USA Libertarian says Gab got canceled. Yeah, they got canceled. So, even if you try to compete with some of these other entities, they have the power to just deplatform you, so you can't utilize those other channels. So when Jack Dorsey comes on and says, nope, we got all these other channels, not really, because they're being limited by the internet. Gab's upstream provider, that's a great point. And the Red said Gab's upstream provider blatantly told them to censor. And that's the other thing that I remembered. I think Amazon Web Services dropped somebody, the Google Cloud Platform dropped somebody else. So even these big bandwidth providers are now getting the crushing weight of, I don't know, whatever factions in the country don't want Gab to exist. They're cracking down on the service providers. Even Cloudflare, which is a DNS provider, was limiting access to certain websites, or saying we don't want them as customers anymore. So this free speech issue is sort of really being narrowed in due to political correctness, due to political animosity. They want to narrow your language and your ability to express yourself, which is very concerning. All right, we got some other questions. Somewhere, USA Libertarian says, somewhere a Democrat remembers antitrust. Yeah. Gal Rose says, what about Amazon? Do they not have 230, and are they liable for product reviews posted on the platform? I think both Amazon and Twitter have both automatic and manual moderation of content. Yeah, so I think Amazon's a little bit of a different beast. They're not talking so much about free speech. Amazon, I think, is much more analogous to the bookstore than Twitter is. Right? Amazon's allowing certain things on their platform, but it's typically not a platform for political discourse or for spreading of news or information. Not yet. I'm sure they're looking at an acquisition to build a social media platform at some point, but that just doesn't exist right now. And it's not something that sort of has the same feel to me as some of these others. I haven't seen anywhere where Amazon is censoring the New York Post story, for example. But certainly, they're within the confines of that rule. I would imagine that they've probably used it a lot in litigation. Gigi says, hi, Rob. How you doing? I'm good, Gigi. Thanks for being here. Today is a good day. We're at a Wednesday, which means we're less than a week away from the election. So as soon as that's done and over, we're going to be able to get back into some more of the criminal law stuff a little bit. I am excited about that. Faith and I were talking about this election stuff prior to the show today. We're both like, this would be good when we have something else to talk about. Marine 2007 says, serious question, because I can't remember, was Bell bought out or were they dismantled? Yeah, Bell was dismantled. They were broken up into like Southern Bell and, Bell something and like a bunch of different Bells. Let's see here. Gigi says, every day is good with your show. Thanks, Gigi. Appreciate you being here for that. Thank you for that. Okay, did you notice how Tony B was gone with private military security over an FBI detail? I did not notice that. Interesting. Mick Lovin says, Bobulinski is on a clear agenda with motive. Meanwhile, decorated Navy Admiral McRaven endorsement of Biden was exactly covered by you in retrospect. Yeah, of course. Yeah, Bobulinski has an agenda. No question at all. Yeah, no question at all. He's got an agenda. Both parties have an agenda. Just because information has an agenda doesn't mean that the information is bad and that you shouldn't look at it. You can certainly question the credibility of it because the person has an agenda. But if you overcome that hurdle, if you say, yeah, look, he's got an agenda, that might impact his credibility because now he's motivated by achieving his objective. But if you can, recognize that and you can still verify the information and that information is still credible, you don't just throw it out because you don't like the messenger. You still want to analyze the information and then make your analysis accordingly. 48 Kingmaster says, yep, I thought Amazon owned Twitch. They do own Twitch. Yeah, that's a good point. So you're right. So Section 230 would apply on that platform, certainly. Yeah, Amazon owns Twitch. Zulu's laughing at Bobulinski. I think there are delays. I think the delays are network crowding. Bells were broken up and then reassembled. Let's see. Google owns YouTube and many other services. Bobulinski's proves that the Bidens are even incompetent at corruption. That comes from USA Libertarian. Yeah, I mean, this is something that I was curious about. If you are a Democrat, if you're a Joe Biden supporter, how angry are you at the Biden campaign? Or how angry if you're a Bernie Sanders supporter, or if you're a Pete Buttigieg supporter, and you're watching all of this stuff unfold? You know that the Biden campaign had this stuff. They knew about this, right? They had to have known about this up during the Democratic primaries and leading up to this point. So they still pushed him through knowing that this was a potential, and now it's all coming out. And so, they had a lot of other candidates who wouldn't have to be dealing with this issue. So, I mean, if I were a Bernie Sanders supporter and I had somebody, if I was sitting here watching this unfold, I would be sick to my stomach saying, well, we could have had a better candidate, not somebody whose son is engaging in foreign business deals that might literally cost them the election. If Joe Biden loses this election, I don't know what the left is going to do. I would be very upset at their lack of transparency surrounding this issue. We have End the Red says, after Charlottesville 2016, even small websites were being deplatformed by their hosting companies. They will not allow real competition to gain traction. Yeah, it's a really... Woody H says, I'm for Bernie. Can't tell you how pissed I am. Yeah, I would imagine you would be upset, because now you're dealing with somebody who is very risky. This could change the course of the election, and you might have had somebody with a little bit more of a wholesome background. McLevin says, all politicians have skeletons in their closet. No question. Zorro says, what gets me is the arrogance to think they can just do anything they want regardless of the law. Zulu says, I genuinely do not care about them knowing about this hoax. My understanding is that the proper response is blind denial and doubling down straight from the last successful playbook. Zwick K says, freedom of the press seems to have gone away in Canada. Trudeau has banned Rebel News from his press conferences. Liberals have bribed CTV, CBC, Global, and City News. We have some more feedback on the Bernie stuff. We have USA Libertarian. He says, do you want to know why they screwed Bernie? Yeah, I would like to know why they did. The Democratic Party has a long history of super suspicious activity. Look at Hillary's Ponzi scheme back in the 80s. Class 3 dealer says Biden for Leavenworth. We have Colorado PSE LLC says, once a brief is submitted to the Supreme Court, how long does it usually take for them to decide if they are going to hear it or not? So Torres versus the United States. It's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. The website that I typically check on when I follow different Supreme Court stuff is just the SCOTUS blog. So if you go to SCOTUS blog or just type that into Google, SCOTUS for the Supreme Court of the United States, I will follow they have a calendar there, and they basically are following all of the writs of certiorari there. And I haven't actually looked and seen, how much once it's submitted. I think the reason is there really is no standard answer. So it kind of depends on what the issue is. There are certain situations like all of these election cases, the Supreme Court is going to hear that immediately. So we had covered this on this channel. There was a case out of Pennsylvania that went up to the Supreme Court, and it came back, they sort of denied certiorari into the Supreme Court. They sent it back down with a 4-4 decision. Well, now we have a 9th judge on the bench, and so now the parties are reappealing this to the Supreme Court. And because the election's 6 days away now, they are going to hear that quickly. So it sort of depends. If it's a really pressing issue, they'll hear it. But if it's something that is a little bit more, something that can wait, like if they're going to be revisiting a Fourth Amendment issue, or if, something like Roe versus Wade works its way up, they may get the writs submitted, and they may have a long period of time where they're sort of discussing and having these, Supreme Court kind of backroom conversations about, do we want to accept this case or not? So I think some will be very quick. Some will be a lot longer than that. Okay. We've got, Bernie wasn't dirty. Bernie wouldn't play ball, according to USA Libertarian. That's why he got booted. We got Agape Path says, why has it taken so much information to get people's attention? We knew this was going to be down for the past few years, yet people were blinded by the liberal media to think for themselves. Any ideas for dropping Section 230 while still allowing blocking of actual Nazi racist content? So That's a tough question, right? Because now you're getting back into the viewpoint discrimination stuff. Right? Either you're for free speech or you're not, in my mind. If you're going to go down that route, you have a slippery slope, which is a very, very sort of kind of overly used fallacy. But if you do, let's say you repeal Section 230, you make certain limitations on the type of content that can absolutely be removed. You could say Nazi content. You could say, certain things like, child pornography, of course, maybe imagery involving death. All of those types of things can be removed or age restricted. But then the question becomes, we're seeing this already, this sort of creeping limitation, right? In 2016, it was all this, we're under attack from the Russians. Now we're hearkening back to the Russians, even though there's no evidence of the Russians being involved in Hunter Biden's hard drive. Not any that I've seen. A lot of speculation from the intelligence community, but nothing specifically, nothing in evidence that this has come from a foreign intelligence company. So if you start now, adding these limitations to the laws on what constitutes free speech, tomorrow you might say, well, now we got to limit stuff that comes from the Russians. Well, did this stuff come from the Russians? Well, no, not based on the evidence, but according to the media, they're saying that it might have. And so if they're in control of the rules, if they get to flip the switch and say this is now off limits, what are they going to do that for? And what are they not going to do that for? I think that's kind of where this argument is boiling down to, because they are limiting certain topics and allowing others. Can we get something on the moves? Can we get something tomorrow on the moves at the ATF in the last few days? ATF. Yeah, we can take a look at that. Not sure I'll cover it, but I'm not sure what they're doing. Jay Shopta says you need to beat hate speech by exposing it. You defeat it in the arena of ideas and discussions. Yeah, I'm pretty much on board for that. I'm pretty much on board for this idea that we want more speech, not less. And I think is if the platforms are allowing more people to talk, that's really what we want. We want more exchange of ideas. So the idea that we're going to start limiting things is not very attractive to me. Zulu's back. He says, I'm not even convinced that it's his hard drive, much less convinced that it wasn't doctored and held for this exact purpose. It's an interesting take there, Zulu. I think it's there's a lot of material there. So a lot of the stuff would need to be faked, but there's a lot at stake. So there's no question that somebody with enough resources would be able to do that. Elias Diaz says, do you watch any podcasts? Yeah, so I listen to Scott Adams basically almost every morning. I think he's outstanding. He's got an interesting perspective on a lot of things. I check him out on Twitter, on Periscope. He's actually on YouTube now. I watch him on YouTube. That would probably be my most common one. There are times where I'll listen to, of course, Joe Rogan. And then there's some other ones. I do listen to a lot of audiobooks, and I actually started this meditation program. So we're going to see how that works out. Here's an example. In my case of the content I make. Take the SFM animations I make. Tell me my content isn't fair use when I'm doing 3D animations in transformative manner. Okay. NABR says, can't the tech companies be held responsible for sticking to their own posted rules? Yes, they can. So I think you can bring claims against them for violating their terms of service, but you're at an extreme disadvantage. Remember, those terms of service are written by teams of lawyers who write them to benefit the company. You agree to them and you play by their rules. I was reading Meth Dealer, MLP Death Dealer. And here's an example in my case of the content I make at R&R Law Group. Take the SFM animations I make. People tell me my content isn't fair use when I'm doing 3 animations in a transformative manner. Yeah, I don't know. I can't speak to that on fair use and copyright law and trademark law and all that stuff. Rachel B says, is Bobulinski implicating himself in wrongdoing as well? Why would he help negotiate these corrupt deals? It's a great question, Rachel. And that was something we brought up previously when we're talking about Tony Bobulinski. So this is something where we give people who are making admissions that are likely to incriminate them or at least expose them to potential criminality. We call them admissions in the law. And when somebody's coming out and making an admission, we give them a lot of credibility. We say it's very likely that if somebody's actually saying something that is a statement against their own interest, then it's probably true. And this gets us around a lot of the hearsay rules. So for example, if somebody says something out of court, it's very difficult to get that statement out of court for the purpose of proving the truth of that statement. So hearsay rules are a whole mess. But what we're talking about here is that if a person makes a hearsay statement and the hearsay statement is an admission, then that statement can come into court because we say it's so credible. Hearsay normally is not very credible. The he said, she said stuff is not credible. But when it's a person who is making an admission, that is credible because people don't typically say things that would hurt them. If they're saying something like that, it's probably because it's true. So if Tony Bobulinski is coming out here and he's saying, look, I was negotiating all these deals. I'm not an expert in foreign registration of foreign agents or any of that stuff in particular about these trade deals and the reporting requirements and manipulating the IRS reporting and all of that stuff. But certainly you would imagine that if he is negotiating these deals to circumvent some of those rules, he would be exposing himself to liability, which makes me believe that his statements are that much more credible. We have another statement from Never Trust a Lawyer. If all media was taken away, what would the public know for certain? Good question. John Biodri says, the ATF is attacking arm braces, which is an instrumental component of a firearm. The ATF is attacking specific companies and the sense positioning to bankrupt those companies. Very interesting. I have not heard that. All right, we have another statement from Zorro says that Bobulinski should be given immunity. USA Libertarian, why is a confession not hearsay? So in large part because the rules say so. That question comes from USA Libertarian. In large part because two reasons. Well, the rules say so. Admissions are not typically hearsay. The hearsay rules are very complicated. So I'm giving you the boiled down version of it. There's hearsay, there's exceptions to hearsay, and then there's certain types of statements which are hearsay, but we just say they're not hearsay. It's really complicated. It really trips up a lot of people when you take evidence in law school. But by and large, generally speaking, you consider admissions to not be hearsay document or hearsay or two reasons. One, because the rules say so. And the other one is because you're typically, when you're giving a confession, you're actually giving it to an officer. So the officer then is the recipient of that statement. So here's how hearsay works, generally speaking. Let's say, for example, that you're in an altercation with your significant other. Okay, let's say it's me and my girlfriend. And my girlfriend and I were in a situation where we get into an argument and she calls the police and the police show up and she tells the police, Rob did something to me. Cop goes, okay, great. I'm going to arrest Rob, take him into custody, and we're going to process him as a domestic violence case. All right. So when we go to trial now and we want to call the witnesses, the government wants to prosecute me and they want to call the witness. So they want to call my girlfriend and they need to bring her into court. If she comes into court and she takes the stand and she says, hey, Rob hit me, she is the recipient of that act. She is the one who was actually hit, and she has personal knowledge of that. Remember what we were talking about under the federal rules of evidence. She has personal knowledge. She was there. She was the recipient. She saw it. She had the physical contact. Therefore, she can come into court and she can testify about it. That's not hearsay because she had personal knowledge of what happened. Now, if she doesn't come to court that day and the cop comes into court and says, okay, Rob's girlfriend's not here. Rob's girlfriend's not going to testify against him. So the government now wants to use the cop. Okay, the cop showed up after the scene. The cop wasn't there when that alleged interaction took place. So the cop didn't see any physical contact, didn't hear anything other than what my hypothetical girlfriend told the cop. So if the cop takes a stand and says, well, Rob's girlfriend told me that he hit her, objection, that's hearsay. That cannot come into court because that officer doesn't have any personal knowledge. That officer only heard from another person, an outside person who's not in the courtroom, And we can't use that statement. So the officer can't say Rob's girlfriend hit me. Objection, hearsay all day long, because we don't have an opportunity to cross-examine the officer about that statement. So that statement goes away. So hearsay can be pretty complicated, but when you're talking about a confession, now that would be different. That would be me sitting across the desk from an officer and saying, yes, I hit my girlfriend. Okay, and in that situation, that would be sufficient because the officer now has personal knowledge. So if I'm writing out my admission, not only is that document admissible, but the officer can come into court and sit down in front of a jury and say, I had a personal conversation with Rob, and this is what he told me. It's no longer hearsay. Okay. All right. Never Trust a Lawyer says the fireworks will start immediately after the election. No question about it. Unless it's a blowout, I think it is going to be something that will be tricky. We have Rob will never own firearms again. That comes from XFIL. Don't know about that. Mick Levin says we are rounding the corner. The Hunter Biden story will just vanish come November 4th. Zorro says, I think Rob should avoid using his girlfriend in these examples. That's true. So Gigi says, well, let's listen. We got Bernardo who says, any updates on the Jonathan Price case? Why the video hasn't been released? So I don't know. Let's write that one down. Let me mark that one down for a follow-up here. So we're talking about Jonathan Price. Okay, got that one marked up. Let's see other questions. Gigi says, I want to know your thoughts about Biden, but what are your thoughts on Kamala? So, Kamala is one of those people. She's a former prosecutor, the attorney general for the state of California, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember how long ago that was. I think she was based out of San Francisco or Sacramento, one of those places. When I was reading about her, I saw a lot of disturbing things that are very much in alignment with how I perceive a lot of prosecutors' offices to be run. And it's very, very pro-prosecutor. It's not, in my mind, what a prosecutor's office is supposed to be in alignment with. They're supposed to be focused on justice, not on convictions. And from a lot of the stuff that I read about how she ran her office, I was not in favor of it. Typically, I am in favor of more, I would say, liberal prosecutors. So, prosecutors' offices that tend to be right-wing are very draconian. They're very follow the policy. They don't care about any mitigation. If we come in with a client and we say, hey, this guy, this is his first offense. He's a father. He's going to lose his job. He's got custody of 2 kids. He's going to lose all this stuff. And he's a really good person. Look at all this amazing stuff he's doing in the world. A conservative prosecutor's office typically goes, don't care. That's the policy. He shouldn't have committed the crime. And a lot of people fall in that camp. I don't, right? I think that people make mistakes. We're all human. None of us are infallible. We all have flaws, and we all can, make mistakes and learn from those mistakes and improve ourselves. So my philosophy on justice is more about rehabilitation. What can we do to help this person? How can we get their lives back on track so that they don't make this mistake again, so that they can, pay their debt to society, serve their day in jail, pay their fines, do whatever it is, and then get back on their feet. That's my view of how this should work. A conservative, typically conservative, and this is where I disagree with conservatives a lot on justice issues specifically, is, they want to be overly harsh. And I just don't think that people are well served. I don't think society is well served. If you put somebody in jail and they lose their job and they lose custody of their kids, they come out of the situation much, much worse. And that is not what I think punishment should be. Yes, they should pay a penalty. Yes, they should, make up their debt to society, but without losing everything. And unfortunately, too many conservative prosecutors think that way. So I like traditionally liberal prosecutors. Now, Kamala Harris did not fit that mold. From what I have seen from her time there, she was prosecuting marijuana offenses. She was, prosecuting parents for truancy. There were parents whose kids weren't going to school and stuff, and she was actually threatening to prosecute parents for those things. That type of stuff typically involves low-income families who can't afford babysitters, who can't afford daycare. And so sometimes they're, mom's at work and the kid ditches school and is being truant. And what's mom supposed to do? So Kamala Harris wants to throw her in jail. Are you kidding me? We don't need more of that. There was also an issue with Kamala Harris who was basically saying that they didn't want to release a bunch of nonviolent offenders out of the California prisons because she needed them, or the state needed them, to do some more inexpensive labor, which when I covered that story, I was like, isn't that like borderline like slave labor, what they're asking for out of her office. And so as a prosecutor, I thought she was very draconian. I thought she was very inhumane in a lot of ways. And now she has been pivoting to this, justice reform, pro everything. Whereas I quite frankly, I don't see her as much different from Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden's the godfather of mass incarceration, author of the 1994 Crime Bill Joe. And then we got the top cop of California, Kamala Harris. So I think these two are two peas in a pod. And I have a lot of difficulty supporting them based on the damage that they have done to the criminal justice system and to the people who are going through the criminal justice system. They treat them like criminals. They want to just throw them in jail and just flush the key down the toilet. And I don't support any of that stuff. So it's been very surprising to me to see a lot of my criminal defense colleagues, a lot of my very liberal, left-wing criminal defense attorneys running around saying that they support these two people who for the last 2 or 3 decades, respectively, have been just decimating the justice system in the United States. I think it's a huge problem, and that's my opinion on them. All right. Let's see here. We have MJ Virgo. We have another Virgo in the house. Conservatives want to be overly harsh because of the people that are generally being brought to the court. You can guess what that means. Yeah, I think that there is some of that going on for sure. Trump needs a good AG looking after his trials in 2021. That comes from Paul Funn. We have Al Murray asking somebody what planet they live on. We see Paul Funn says Trump will be charged with a few obstruction charges for sure. Zulu Zeit says 2 Republican senators voted nay on the crime bill. Emilio says Trump said law and order is okay. Then Biden makes laws for criminals. He is bad. We have Colorado saying you should do a deep dive into Torres versus United States. Let's take a quick look at that one. So there are a lot of cases here. Okay, so yeah, Torres versus U.S. So this case, I'm looking this up on Wikipedia. Looks like it was a decision in 1998. About a sentence enhancement based on a prior conviction, was not subject to the 6th Amendment requirement for a jury to determine the fact beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay, so this is a sentencing enhancement case about undocumented aliens, it looks like. All right, so I have that open. I will take a look at that. Kenneth Reeder says, I wonder when A.G. William Barr is going to do something. Yeah, a lot of us are wondering about that. James High says Trump defied segregationist policy back in the day to get black and Jewish patrons allowed in his club, even though elite were for these policies and it could have ruined him. Interesting. McLovin says policy stance over history is proven to be passed around between the two parties. We have End the Reds who says Joe Biden said Antifa was an idea. I remember that. That was from the first debate, right? It was just an idea. It was a powerful idea. Antifa is a very powerful idea. It's one of those ideas that can just result in entire cities being razed to the ground. You've got buildings being burned, cars exploding. It's pretty powerful. Sort of like a Jedi mind technique that these Antifa people have. Okay, so Colorado says, sorry, the new one about gun rights. So we'll look that up. If it's still pending in the Supreme Court, that may be why it's not showing up. Yeah, the gun rights stuff I think is very, very important. So I will definitely take a look at that one. We'll mark that down. Also, I'm going to add that to my list. Torres versus U.S. Which are your least favorite cases to take? That comes from @GG. The least favorite ones are probably... it's a good question. I really like everything in criminal law. The ones that I think are probably the most frustrating to take are just the general traffic tickets, actually. So we actually do a lot of traffic defense law. In Arizona, traffic crimes are criminal, many of them. You can get charged with a crime for speeding. We have criminal speeding in Arizona. So if you're going any speed that's over 85 miles an hour anywhere in the state of Arizona, it's a crime. So in other words, you can be driving to Los Angeles and you can be speeding. Let's say the posted speed limit from Phoenix to LA is 75 miles an hour, most of the road. If you've ever driven that, nobody is going 95 miles an hour or 75 miles an hour. Everybody's going 95. Basically, that's kind of the standard speed limit. Well, under Arizona law, if you go any speed that's over 85, so 86 in a 75, which is pretty reasonable, right? It's only 11 over. And as I said, nobody's going 75. That's a crime. It's a class 3 misdemeanor. It's punishable by 30 days in jail, fines of $500 plus surcharges. It's a crime. And it goes through the same criminal procedure that any other crime would, a DUI, a domestic violence, and those types of things. Well, the issue with these criminal speeding tickets in Arizona is that many of these are heard in what are called justice courts. In Arizona, we have 26 justice courts in Maricopa County and a number of them throughout other counties. The problem with the justice courts are that you don't have to be a lawyer or even pass the bar to go be a judge in a justice court. All you have to do is run for office. So as long as you get on the ballot and secure enough votes, you can have never gone to law school. You can have never even opened a statute book. You can never even have read a statute. You don't have to take the bar exam. You don't have to have a law degree. You don't have to pass, any of these tests that we have to take. All you have to do is run for office and get elected. Well, the issue here now is that when we're dealing with these judges on criminal cases, they don't understand criminal law. And even though these are just simple traffic tickets, remember, somebody's being charged with a crime. And if they're a doctor or a nurse or a lawyer or a pilot or any one of those things, and they have to report that they've been convicted of a crime, that can be decimating for them. So you would think it's just a simple speeding ticket. Well, no, it's a crime. It's a criminal charge. They will have a criminal conviction on their record. And then when we try to talk to these judges who've never been to law school, it's like speaking a foreign language to these people, and it's very difficult and it's very frustrating. And quite frankly, they're just more tedious than anything, because we're dealing with people on the other side of the aisle who many times just don't understand anything. And so we have to sort of really break it down, and it just gets a little bit tedious. A lot of the other cases are exciting, right? A lot of them are exciting, at least interesting, and we like working on those cases a lot. Okay, so X-File says, my comment about never owning a firearm again relates to domestic violence and how many people accused of it have to plead down charges and can never own a firearm again. Yeah, that's interesting. It is a huge problem. It is a huge problem. So I may have just buried myself on that one, right? Mick Levin says, at R&R, are you going to cover the report out of Minnesota that the police station fire was started by an extremist far-right group? I did not hear about that, but I will take a look at that, at a Minnesota police station. Okay. Let me add that Minnesota story. Okay. We also have Gigi, who says that the fact that traffic offenses are criminal anywhere is hysterical. It's ridiculous. Yeah. And then we have a bunch of judges who don't know the law at all. They just take a 6-week course and then they sentence people to jail. Isn't that crazy? It's Arizona. We have justice court. Sounds like a kangaroo court. Yeah, not a whole lot of justice. At R&R, what does R&R stand for? Robert and Ryan is my business partner. Ryan is my business partner. He's a good man. He's running around court right now. Zorro, doesn't a crime need criminal intent? What if you speed by accident but no intent? So Zorro's exactly right. So a lot of what he's talking about here are sort of standard crimes. So you can have crimes that require, in general, criminal statutes are broken up into two parts. You have what's called a mens rea and you have an actus reus. These are two Latin terms. Mens rea stands for basically mental culpability, or your mental state, your mindset. And then the actus reus is the act. And so what Zorro is talking about is if you're speeding and you don't have the mindset of wanting to speed, well, you're missing the mens rea of the crime. So how can they charge you with a crime? You need both of those. You need a culpable mental state and you need an act. So when you punch somebody, you intended to punch them and then you punch them. It's both of those things. If you didn't intend to punch somebody, then how can you be charged with assault? Right? If somebody else took your arm and threw it into somebody's face, well, you didn't do it. They did it. You didn't intend to do it. If you bump somebody and it wasn't an intentional hit, maybe that's not intentional assault. So that's what he's talking about. But there are other crimes that are called strict liability crimes, which means it doesn't matter what your intent is. You see this a lot with basically sex with underage individuals. If you're 21 and you have sex with a 17-year-old, doesn't matter what you thought. If you thought she was 18, doesn't matter. The fact that you had sex with that person is what's called a strict liability crime. It just says the act alone is enough to convict you. Doesn't matter what you intended. You see that all the time in that situation. And in Arizona, criminal speeding also is a strict liability crime. There's no mental state about it. Just if you do it, you're liable. King One Eye says the criminal justice system is an adversarial system. Other adversarial systems that I know of are basketball and football. Any game that has opposing teams. The court of law apparently is a word game. Apache King says, when are you going to discuss Daniel Cameron's handling of that grand jury? Exclamation, exclamation, exclamation. We're going to add that on the list. We have just a huge list of stuff that we're following. That one is due up. I know that the grand jury, I know that some of the grand jurors are actually speaking now, and I want to dive into that. So I'll add that to the list. We are definitely due up for a Breonna Taylor update. And so maybe we'll save some of that stuff for this Friday. James High says, if a murderer lays a gun on the ground, are you supposed to pick it up and shoot it? Probably not. Probably not. You're going to want to leave that one alone. We have Gigi who says, impeach Daniel Cameron. So we'll dive into that and others. And listen, everybody, it's been a good stream with you. It's about that time, so we're going to wrap up the program. Reminder, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, if you're just swinging by today, do us a favor, hit the subscribe button. We are going to be back here tomorrow and Friday. We do the show every day, 4 p.m. Arizona time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. Next week, we are going to do a mega stream, I think, if everybody's interested in that. And as long as there's people here, we'll just continue to stream the election. We're just going to do a live stream. I talked to Miss Faith about it. We're both on board. So we'll be here, which means we want you to subscribe and join us for that. So hit that button, hit the notification bell, and then block off Tuesday evening, because we're just going to start the show at 4. The polls are going to start closing, and we'll just be here until Lord knows when. Maybe a long night, maybe not. Maybe it's quick and we just wrap up early and go to bed. But we will see. So we will be here for that. As a reminder, if you know anybody who has been charged with a crime in the state of Arizona, that's what we do. That's my day job. This YouTube thing is just something we do sort of at the end of the day, because I love talking about this stuff, and I think it's important that we're having these conversations. I really, truly believe that the criminal justice system is in serious need of repair, and the way that we're going to get there is by having conversations about it, and then by enlisting the general public to go and hold their representatives accountable. The stakeholders in the police departments, in the prosecutors' offices, who are part of the state bar, all of the politicians, these people need to be held accountable. That's why we are monitoring them and watching them and covering the news from our perspective here on Watching the Watchers. So if you know anybody who needs help, send them our way. We would love to help them out. We do a great job, and we have a lot of good people here at our office. So I will leave you with that. Have yourselves a wonderful night, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.